morning. My name is Diana Jameson. I am a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, our Board of Stewards, and the Program Committee Chair. I welcome you this morning with Rumi's words, an invitation that we often sing in fellowship. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again come. During these new times, when the world often seems upside down and we are longing for connection with one another, our program committee has faced many challenges and first-time experiences. A special project that we have taken on is videotaping our services. We have called this the Grand Experiment. Today, I am excited to welcome you to our second Grand Experiment, prepared by Hank Stupai, Nancy Stupai, our pastor, Susan Mosley, and our guest speaker, Eddie Correia. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Susan Mosley, and it is my honor to also welcome you to this service of worship this morning. I'm the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Rappahannock in Whitestone, Virginia. I will be your service leader this morning. UUFR is a caring community whose mission is to put UU principles into practice through programs that empower spiritual exploration, critical thinking, and social service, and also to provide a spiritual home for future generations. We begin our service this morning with the chalice lighting. This flaming chalice is the symbol of a free faith. May it burn with the holy oil of helpfulness and service. May it warm hearts grown cold with indifference. May it light dark places with justice and rekindle hope in despair. May such light and warmth be eternal. And may we be keepers of that flame.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
To the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
To the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
To the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I asked my sister,
I asked my sis,
come and go with me.
come and go with me.
I asked my sister,
I asked my sis,
come and go with me.
come and go with me.
I asked my sister,
I asked my sis,
come and go with me.
come and go with me.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I asked my brother
I asked my bro,
to come and go with me.
come and go with me.
I asked my brother
I asked my bro,
to come and go with me.
come and go with me.
I asked my brother
I asked my bro.
Come and go with me.
Come and go with me.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
If they say no,
If they say no,
I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
If they say no,
If they say no,
well, I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
If they say no,
If they say no,
I'll go anyhow.
I'll go anyhow.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
And I won't turn back.
And I won't turn back.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to that freedom land.
I'm on my way
I'm on my way
to the freedom land.
to the freedom land.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
I'm on my way.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way.
On my way.
I'm on my way. Great God, I'm on my way. I'm on my way.
Our opening words this morning are from Lao Tse, prophet, philosopher from the 6th century BCE. Hear what he has to say to us today. If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. May it be so. One of the most meaningful parts of worship at UUFR is the sharing of our joys and concerns. When we are in worship together, we get to speak out loud those things with each other. We get to put a piece of sea glass into the water as a symbol of that joy or that concern. And the container, the water chalice, is really a metaphor for the larger container that is our UUFR community. So I invite you now to take a moment to reflect on your own longings, celebrations, worries, joys, concerns, and in your heart, offer them to our community. Take a moment now. As the water chalice is filled with those thoughts and prayers of the community, I offer one more piece to represent all those that may have remained unspoken, all those that are deep in the hearts and hard to articulate. All of those things belong in our shared chalice and in our shared love and trust for one another.
Our reading this morning is taken from President Lincoln's second inaugural address. I want to set the stage for you. This address was given March 4th, 1865. The surrender at Appomattox was not going to occur until April 9th. And then, of course, Lincoln was assassinated on April 15th. At the time Lincoln gave this inaugural, the Union was winning the war, and it was pretty clear to everybody that was going to be the outcome. So a lot of people expected him to gloat and declare victory at the second inaugural, but of course he did not do that. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than to let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish, and the war came. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God. Each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Good morning. Behind me are two bodies of water, Whiting's Creek, and beyond that, the Rappahannock River, both treasures to many of those of us who live in the area as well as those who visit. The land separating the two is part of Helen and Tom Foster's property. Will you now join me at the river's edge for a time of meditation, of stillness, of peace?
we have had an opportunity in our service to hear the reading and reflect on the reading that Eddie brought to us. We've also had a chance to listen to the lovely music by our friends Molly and Susan. And so I want to offer us now a time of prayer. I know that prayer in the UU tradition means different things to different people, but I'm using a UU resource, and I want to share this prayer with you from the book that we give to all of our new members, The 7 Principles in Word and Worship. This has meant a great deal to me, and I hope it touches your heart and your soul in a special way. O Spirit of compassion, enter our hearts, we pray. Be with us in the hard hours. Help us to be kind this day. O Spirit of unity, help us enter into the pain of our neighbors. Let us walk where they walk, that we might speak a gentle word along the way. O Spirit of love, enlarge our sympathies toward all troubled folk. Let us be generous of heart, that we might forgive and be forgiven. O Spirit of thanksgiving, let us be grateful for hands that serve, for those who give, and for those who receive. O Spirit of life, let us walk together in our weakness, that by treading the path together we may be made strong. O Spirit of the spheres, help us to face the mystery of being, secure in us the larger patterns we can trust, and bless us this holy day. Amen. The light of this chalice would soon flicker and die without the oil that nourishes its flame. And just as this flame cannot burn without oil, our fellowship cannot survive or thrive without the financial as well as personal support of its members and friends. Let us take this time to give freely and generously an offering to sustain and strengthen our shared religious community, a community of memory, hope, faith, and love. I am pleased to introduce to you today's speaker, Eddie Correia. Eddie is a Washington, D.C. attorney and an adjunct professor at American University's Law School. He was chief counsel of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee and served in the Clinton administration as special counsel to the President for Civil Rights in the White House. Eddie is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. In addition to those things, Eddie is an author. He has written several books. Two of the titles are The Uncertain Believer, Reconciling God and Science. I believe that book is in our UUFR library. And the other is Teaching Your Child About God in a Scientific World. In addition to those, he's written 2 novels. But especially, Eddie is a beloved member at UUFR. So join me in welcoming Eddie as our speaker this morning. Welcome, Eddie.
I want to talk to you a few minutes this morning about how to bring our country together. There's no dispute that we are divided. I don't think anyone would argue with that. The question is, how do we bring ourselves together? Now, we're divided along many lines, what we might call fault lines. There's race, religion, political views, income, man, woman, gay and straight. You can think of a lot of ways to divide us. Some of these ways we're divided are not that important. You know, we argue over sports teams and we argue over art and music. That doesn't matter. It's where we have deep fault lines that is really the cause of stress in the country. I'm going to talk about three principal ones: race, culture, and religion, and I'm going to talk about a fourth one, politics, because it's intertwined with the other three. Now, these existed a long time before President Trump came along. Race, division over race obviously existed since the origin of the country. It's easy to forget how much progress we've made. From the first president who owned slaves, through a civil war, through Jim Crow, through the 1964 Civil Rights Act, through our first black president. So we've made a lot of progress, and we shouldn't forget that. But race can still tear our country apart, and it's doing that right now, in large part because someone's fanning the flames. Not just President Trump, although he's a leader of it, but a lot of people are out there fanning the flames, white nationalists and neo-Nazis and other people who are really deeply racist. But again, that division was there before Trump came along. Cultural divisions, we've always had those. There's always been a division between highly educated people who, let's say, understood evolution and believed in it versus less educated people who did not. Today, I think we can say our cultural divisions, they tend to run along education lines, college educated versus not college educated. Also a split along rural, who lives in rural areas and who lives in urban areas. And somewhat modern splits, people who are comfortable with globalization and diversity in international affairs and comfortable with immigration. And with people divided with people who do not. People who are comfortable with diversity in sexuality and sexual orientation versus people who are not. Again, there before Trump came along, but he's probably fanned the flames of that. Religious divisions, they certainly overlap with those other two categories, but to the extent they are directly tied to religious affiliation, I want to talk about that for a moment. A lot of people, maybe the biggest single group, don't identify with a formal religious affiliation, a formal denomination. But we've had divisions over religion, as I say, before Trump. Remember when there used to be a Catholic-Protestant divide. Remember when JFK was nominated, people argued, well, gee, can we really have a Catholic president? I don't think that's troubling us so much today. Today, I think the main division is between the evangelicals and everybody else. And that stems, I think, from the involvement of evangelicals in the political process, which of course they have a right to do. But once they do that, then that is going to promote some division. And the rise of the anti-abortion movement. Again, all there before Trump came along, but worse now. And finally, politics obviously overlaps with all these categories. There's a very deep fault line between people who are supporters of Trump and people who are not supporters of Trump. There's a middle group who might say, well, I don't like Trump as a person, but I tend to like some of his policies and so on. I understand that. But there is a very large group of people who are very devoted followers of Trump. Almost has the dimensions of a cult. And there are a lot of people who are really hate Trump with a passion. Now, that is the kind of division that I think is unlike divisions over presidents in the past. It's just much deeper and much more intense. Now, once Trump leaves the scene, or to restate that, he's really not going to leave the scene if he's defeated this fall. He's going to leave the White House, so he's not going to be the President of the United States that we listen to every day. He's going to be around, and I want to talk about that in a little bit, but he's not going to entirely leave the scene. But things are going to be very, very different. So how do we put the country back together again if Trump is defeated in the fall? Well, first of all, what does it mean to say we're putting the country together again? It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. We're not going to agree to everything. What it means is that we have an unspoken compact about how to disagree. And the first step in all that is to respect each other's views. Now, there's an important qualification I want to add to that. All human beings deserve respect just because they're human beings, but not all viewpoints deserve respect. Some are so extreme that they do not. So when I talk about respecting views, I'm talking about things that, although we might not agree with, they're reasonable enough that we can still respect them. The way a modern democratic country resolves those disputes is you argue about it. You have political candidates argue about it. You go to the polls. Somebody wins and somebody loses, and then the other side says, I accept the results, and we'll go on to fight another day. We've gotten so far away from that that I think it's often easy to forget how it's supposed to work. But that's how it's supposed to work. We disagree, we argue, we go to the polls, somebody wins, somebody loses, and the other side accepts it. Let me turn to some examples of policy issues, and I do this in part as a practice session to see if we can disagree over some very controversial and difficult issues and respect each other's viewpoints. Let me just talk about three. There are lots of examples I could use. I want to talk about abortion, use of force by police, and statutes of the Confederate leaders and statutes that are related to that. Let's talk about abortion. Abortion is a really tough issue. Now, my own view is not particularly relevant, is that women should have the choice to decide whether to carry a baby to term, and depending on the circumstances, should have that choice pretty late in pregnancy. But I see how there are people who could believe that ending the life of a fetus is ending a human life. I don't agree with that, but I get that. Now, are there compromises possible on this very difficult issue? Well, yes. How late in pregnancy an abortion occurs, whether there's federal funding. Some state laws are going to be broad, some state laws are going to be narrow. I wouldn't be surprised if President Biden or Congress began to look at compromises to kind of lower the emotional temperature of this issue. I'm not a woman, so it's even easier for me to talk about that, or easier for me to talk about it. But I think there are certainly different positions which we could we don't necessarily agree with, but we could understand how someone would have that view, and therefore we could respect that view. Use of force by police. Again, some views don't deserve respect. Unnecessary force doesn't deserve respect. Using force against someone because of their race doesn't deserve respect. But to step back from that, we have to understand that police officers make very difficult decisions under very difficult circumstances, and they have to make those often in a split second. Now, you watch television shows and you can get the idea that, well, gee, if you're just patient enough, there's somebody who looks very hostile, looks very violent, has got a gun. I can talk him out of using it. And on the television shows, they do talk him out of using it. That's actually not real life in most cases. In real life, both sides are terrified. They don't know what the other side's going to do. police officer can fire dozens of times sometimes and not hit anything. The whole process, the process in real life is pretty chaotic. People, up to half the people involved in that from the citizen side have a mental disability. They're difficult to predict. You don't understand what's going on in their head. Now, I'm not saying that police brutality is a reasonable view that one could respect. It's not. We should have rules, ban chokeholds, ban use of unnecessary force. And police officers are trained, they should learn the rules, and they need to be held accountable. I've been pushing, and nobody's agreed with me so far, but I'm still working on it, is using technology to develop much more sophisticated non-lethal weapons. But the point of this discussion is that there is another side to this. There's the police officer side, and there's the citizen side, and we need to try to see both sides. One last example, these Confederate statutes, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jefferson Davis Highway, still named that, incidentally. I don't think it's a reasonable point of view to say, let's continue to have statutes that promote and honor the Confederate position in the Civil War. That's not reasonable. That doesn't deserve respect. On the other hand, there's the statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who were slave owners. And you might say, well, they did a lot more for the country than they hurt the country by owning slaves. You may disagree with that, or you may not. The point is, there's a spectrum of views on this. There are going to be people on that spectrum who have views that we don't agree with, but we still need to respect their views. Now, what's the second step? The second step is to communicate, to talk with one another. It's always been hard to talk about difficult political issues. Trump didn't start that. But I think we've gone from having conversations be very difficult to conversations being almost impossible. Conversations between people who support Trump and people who oppose him. When he has left the White House, it's going to be easier, I think. Now, it's not going to be that easy because he's still going to be around. I mean, he is a unique figure. He's unique in history, I think, in modern history at least. He's uniquely corrupt and amoral, far more than Richard Nixon or LBJ, I think, are presidents we know about. So he has done something to communication that's been very damaging. When he has gone from the White House, we need to try to communicate. Now, that's going to require patience. It's going to require listening. And it's going to require having the view that the whole point of a conversation is not that I win the argument or that I embarrass the other side. If that's what your goal is in a conversation, it's not going to get anywhere. The point is to try to understand the other side and maybe try to share your perspectives, even if you walk away and you still disagree. Now, we're going to face some serious headwinds in doing that. If Trump loses the election, he's going to claim the election was rigged. He's going to claim there are millions of fraudulent ballots. We'll probably be in court. It's going to get very messy. We're going to be in courts where people are contesting the results of a particular state. The whole election may end up in the Supreme Court. It could be Trump supporters are going to be out in the streets, and he might be encouraging them to be out in the streets. That's what happens in third world countries after an election. There's a mob that goes out in the streets claiming fraud. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens here. Now, in the face of that, it's not going to be easy to have a civil dinner time conversation between people who support Trump and people who don't. But I think we have to try. Now, those are things we do at the personal, individual level. Let's talk what we want our national leaders to do at their level. I believe if Joe Biden is elected that he will reach out to Trump supporters. I think he's going to make a special effort to say we are all Americans. I think he's going to make special efforts to help people in rural areas, to help people in declining manufacturing industries, to help coal miners, even though that's a dying industry. At least those are his instincts. I know him a little bit, like thousands of other people, but I believe that's where he's going to come from. He's not going to look at Republicans as the enemy. He's going to look at them as the political opposition. So that's where he's going to start from, I think. Now, there are going to be a couple of challenges to that. One is, if Trump loses, he's going to be out there rallying his followers to take the position that the whole election was a fraud, that's invalid, that's illegitimate. And I think Trump should I think Biden should just resist engaging on that. Make a statement, point out your views, and just continue to govern. Because if you get involved in that kind of back and forth, I don't think it's going to be very productive. A second headwind that Biden is going to face is that he's going to have a left wing, a progressive left wing that's going to push him to do more, that's going to push him to be more aggressive, to take positions that he's resisted. For example, prosecuting Trump. That's something that third world dictators do. They try to put their political opponents in prison. I don't think it's good for the country here. They're going to push him, the left wing is going to be pushing Biden to take positions, defund the police, and so forth. I think he should resist that. I think he will resist it. But I think his instincts are to try to find some middle ground. Now, let me talk about bipartisanship. I think we always have to start from that perspective. What can you work out with the other side? But there are limits to that. The Republicans after the election are going to be saying, well, gee, we never really supported Trump as a person. We only agreed with some of his policies. They're going to be trying to revise their position so that they are spared the accusation that they simply were enablers of Trump. They're going to be engaged in trying to rewrite history, much as the South did after the Civil War. I think Biden will just have to deal with that and realize that these folks are trying to scramble for their reputation. Republicans are also going to be trying to deprive Trump of victories, just like Mitch McConnell said after Obama was elected. So how do you deal with that? Well, you start out with language of reconciliation. You start out with language of bipartisanship, and you make a genuine effort to compromise. But bipartisanship has its limits. On the small issues, we can find common ground. On the big issues, healthcare reform, climate change, revising the tax code so that we can get out of this mess we're in, those probably do not have bipartisan solutions. There's probably not going to be a compromise with the Republicans. What do you do in those circumstances? You get the votes and you try to win. I used to be, by the way, for the filibuster rule. You remember the filibuster rule says you need 60 votes in the Senate. And I think that's going to prevent it. I've changed my mind about it. I don't think we can get past the filibuster rule on these big issues. If Biden wants to make major health care reform and major tax reform and major climate change reform, I think you got to do it even if it's a 51-49 vote, and you're going to have to do that by getting rid of the filibuster rule. So let me conclude this way. On a personal level, we can do something. We can respect each other's views. We can try to communicate. We're going to have to be patient, and we're going to have to listen. And we're going to have to do that in the face of difficult circumstances where people are not being patient on the other side. On a national level, we can use language of bipartisanship, language of compromise, and genuinely try to reach a compromise. But if you can't, I think you have to act. Now, through it all, language and tone matters. It's just like personal relationships. Often you get into a discussion with your spouse or a good friend, and their position is actually reasonable. It's not their position that's making it so hard to talk. It's language and tone. And I think the same thing is true on a national level. We need to return to the language of civility, the language of reasonable discourse, even with people we don't agree. And I think we'll be amazed at how different the world sounds. Thank you very much.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of gray, for purple mountains' majesty, above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. O nation of the immigrant, the slave and native son, whose loyal families labor still, that we may live as one. America, America, renew thy founder's call. Let liberty and justice be the right of one and all. O bountiful of forest green, of lake and fertile lands, where seeds of hope are tended by thy sons and daughters' hands. America, America, the earth still calls to thee, where human life and nature strive to live in harmony. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of gray, for purple mountains' majesty, above thy fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea, from sea to shining sea.
at the close of our service, we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now I wish we could join hands in our closing circle. But as we join them in spirit, please hear these words of benediction. Where hate rules, let us bring love. Where sorrow, joy. Let us strive more to comfort others than to be comforted, to understand others than to be understood, to love others than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. May these words, taken from St. Francis of Assisi, continue to move us. May they be so in our lives, and may you go forth from this service with courage, hope, and love. Namaste.